God's timing versus your timing. We all know that God's timing is the best for our life, but it's not easy to come to that decision of letting go of your timing and accepting God's timing. So, let's have a chat. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited that you're here. My voice might sound a little raspy. It's very early in the morning right now, but I was gonna get this video done. Anyway, let's get into it. I think I definitely talked about timing on this channel, but it was one that the idea came to mind. I was like, I want to sit down and talk about it again. It's one of those things that it takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of having peace in who he is and a knowledge of who God is to get to that point of letting go of your timeline and just accepting God's timeline. But the part that made me really want to do this video was I was going to New York yesterday and the train was at 1:09, I believe. I left work a little bit early. I got in my car. I was speeding a little bit, I can't even lie. I was speeding down. I finally got there at like 1:06-ish. I was like, okay, I have 3 minutes. I did my little sprint. I ran to try and catch that train. I got there by 1:08. As I'm getting there at 1:08, that train is taking off. And that whole idea of letting go of your timeline just came into mind again, because I think one of the parts that it's like, hard to let go of your timeline is when you feel like you've done everything right. Like I said, I left work early yesterday. I got there where I felt like I still had extra time. I was running. I did everything right to meet that timing of 1:09, and yet I still missed that train. And I really hope that that sets a lot of us free. It honestly helped me a lot yesterday of knowing that, Kemi, there are certain times in life where you're gonna do everything right. You're gonna do everything by the book. But if it still does not work out, you have to just let yourself know that it wasn't the time. I think a lot of us, we kind of need to forgive ourselves because certain timelines didn't pan out the way we wanted. And it's so easy to get in the headspace of feeling disappointed in yourself or feeling like a failure because you didn't hit a certain timeline. And I just have to say, just because your life is not going to a set timeline that you set for yourself does not mean that you're a failure. I was thinking about this. I feel like there's a certain timeline in life of you're born, you go to school these years, at 17, 18 you graduate, you then go to college, you graduate at like 22, you get a nice job. At a few years later down the line, in your 20s, you get married. Maybe in your 30s, you have kids. And that's just the timeline that has been set in place of how life is supposed to go. And oftentimes when our life doesn't follow that timeline, we get disappointed. And in getting ready for this video and just reflecting on scriptures, nowhere in the Bible does it say school, job, marriage, kids, work, die. Like, it doesn't. Nowhere in the Bible does it say this is a timeline for your life. And I think that really helped me out. I was like, God never set this timeline that we put on ourselves of we have to follow school, work, marriage, kids. Like, it was never written in scripture. You have to follow this exact timeline to fulfill purpose. Like, no, it just is not in scripture. And I have to tell myself of like, just because you don't meet a certain goal by a certain age does not mean you're unaccomplished, does not mean that you're a failure, does not mean that you still won't accomplish it. That's also another thing to keep in mind of, I might not accomplish it at a certain age, but that doesn't mean that I won't accomplish it. And one thing that I learned a while ago is there are certain goals and timelines that I have for myself that through a lot of searching and through a lot of reflection, I realized I wanted to accomplish these goals by a certain timeline because of how it looks to others. Yeah, I'm gonna give you an example. Let's say you get a 6-figure job at 22, and let's say you get a 6-figure job at 32. The praise and the congratulations you get if you get a 6-figure job at 22 is a lot different than the praise and congratulations that you get if you get that 6-figure job at 32. At 22, it's like, oh my gosh, fresh out of college, I can't believe he did that, I can't believe she did that, that's so like amazing, like applause to you, wow, 6-figure job. But when you get it at 32, it's kind of like, girl, you've been in the workforce for a little bit. Like, we got there 5 years ago. And I think it's one of those things where you really have to let go of the perception of others making you feel like your accomplishments are not worthy of praise. Whether or not you get that 6-figure job at 22 or 32, you still got the 6-figure job. Like, it doesn't matter. And while the praises might be different, don't let that be your motive of, I want to accomplish this by a certain age so people can see that I did that by a certain age. Even me as an example, when I started my business at like, how old was I? I think I was 17, 18. It was like, oh my gosh, you're already braiding, you're already a businesswoman at 17, 18 years old. Like, I got a lot of, more like 18, 19. I got a lot of praises. But then after a while, it becomes the norm. It becomes, okay, Other people are running their business too. And that's just another case of when you do certain things at a certain age, it's very cool. It's very like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing that at a certain age. And I think when I thought about that, of like the praises that I got then and now are different, it really made me sit and think. I'm like, Kemi, are you chasing just people's gratification of you started something at a young age? And that's when I also thought that sometimes we're trying to accomplish these things by a certain timeline. It's more, I guess it's more worthy of praise if you do it by a certain age than if you do it at a later stage. And one thing that also came to mind is there comes a certain point in life where even if you're chasing that, oh, I accomplished it at a certain age, the age at which you accomplish it, it doesn't matter anymore. It's just a matter of if you accomplished it. I think about college. Let's say you graduate college in 6-7 years rather than 4 years. While that might be a thing at a certain point, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it took me forever. Maybe when you're applying for jobs in the beginning, it might be a thing of like, you spent 6 years in college. By the time you're a little bit older, it's simply going to be, do you have a college degree or not? I even think about it with marriage. When you get older, it's, are you married or not? It's not, are you married and how long did it take before you finally got married? Nobody is checking that timeline anymore. And a lot of these things that we're chasing, they will come into fruition. Our timelines are just simply different, and God's timing for it is simply different. And ultimately, when we accomplish it, all those years that happened before, nobody's looking back at it. Let's say you're an MD or PhD. No one's gonna write Kemi Dada PhD, it took her 10 years. Nobody is writing that. I got my PhD, and that's that. And that's also another thing that kind of helped me be okay with this of, after a certain point, it's just whether or not you accomplish it. Nobody's looking at the time it took you. When you're in it, it really sucks, don't get me wrong. But it's whether or not you accomplish it, and whether you accomplish it at 25, 35, 30, 40, you accomplish the goal. And I think that's the most important part of it all. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit into prophecies and God's timing versus our timing. One thing that I've had to learn, and somebody taught me this recently, was prophecies are a great thing. However, when we get prophecies, we expect that prophetic word to come true in like 3 to 5 business days, max. We're like, oh, God said I'm going to be this. Where is it now? And that's another reason why you really have to let go of your timeline, because sometimes God will give you a prophetic word, he'll give you the revelation, but it might take years. Sometimes it could be even a decade or more. And I think that's a hard part of, we hear the good thing that God has for us and we're like, I want it now. We're trying to control the prophecy that God gave us. And I had to realize certain promises are for a certain time. And while God might give you the revelation, you still have to trust in his timing and bringing that to pass. Shared a lot on this channel, there's a certain molding that happens when God is taking you from where you are right now to living in the prophecy. God can directly or use somebody else to give you a prophetic word about how God is going to give you your dream job. And all of a sudden you're like, where is it now? Every day you're badgering God. He didn't say when. He simply said the dream job is coming. And now when you get a prophetic word like that, your role is to go back and be like, God, get me ready for this role. How can I prepare for this role? What do you want me to learn before this word comes to pass? You have to trust God's timing. And the way that I thought about this is with vision. 2020 vision is God's vision, and I believe 2050 is our vision. I was looking it up this morning. 2050, 2040, it's when nearsightedness. You see things up close where you don't see it far out. God has 2020 vision where he can see far, even 2010. I think 2010 is like the best one. God is seeing the full picture of that prophecy. We have a very nearsighted vision and we just see end goal. But God is looking at all the struggles and hurdles that you need to go through this so you have the strength. So when this comes, you now know how to tackle it. God is seeing the full picture with his 2010, 2020 vision. You have like a little 2050. You just see right here. That's all we're seeing. And we're trying to rush God's timeline of like, oh, the promise sounds so good. Let me just get it now. And it's like, girl, you got stuff to go through. You have things that you got to learn. And I just love that of like, God has the 2010, 2020 vision of he sees the full picture and I only see a half of it. And that's another thing that has helped me kind of trust God's timing in knowing that as long as I've prayed, as long as I've done the right things, if I don't have it, clearly there's something that God is doing. Clearly there's something that God is building me up for. Clearly there's a lesson that God wants me to learn. So instead of getting upset at God and being like, God, why isn't it happening right now? Step back for a second. God, what do you want me to learn? I think about Abraham. Abraham was called the father of all nations. Before he became an actual father, years. But that word was spoken over his life earlier on. And yet it didn't happen for years. There's so many stories of God gave them a word and it took a lot of time before it actually came to fruition. And that's just one of the things that has helped me in knowing that even if it doesn't happen on my own timeline, God can still make it happen. When in this economy, whenever you get that six-figure job, let it be 150, 200, whenever you get that six-figure job, that is still a six-figure job that is going to pay bills. And I really think it's so easy, especially with social media, where like you get on the internet, it's like, I'm a 20-year-old millionaire, I'm 25 years old, and here's how I made six figures in one day. There's so much information out there that really makes you doubt the timing that God has for your life. I feel like what God is doing in your life is not as important, or it's not as worthy of praise because other people are doing it. And one thing that I like to tell myself often is, Kemi, God does not need a lot of time. While you might have this timeline of, okay, I need to meet him. I think about this episode in Friends. I think Rachel turned 30 where she wants to have her first kid by 35. But she also wanted to wait a full year before they had kids, which means at 34, she needs to be married. But she also wants a full year to plan the wedding, which means she needs to be engaged by 33, but also wants another 2 or 3 years to date, so she needs to meet him now. She had this whole timeline mapped out in her head of, this is exactly how it has to happen, and she had it mapped out to the T. And two things that I'm going to say. God doesn't need a lot of time to fulfill the promises over your life. God's ways are not our ways. The way God works, we can't explain it. And what you mapped out as a 5 to 10 year process, God can make it happen in a year. And that's one of the things that I've had to tell myself of like, Kemi, God does not need a lot of time. He just needs somebody that's obedient. He just needs somebody that will yield to him. That's simply it. So don't get so caught up in like, oh my gosh, I didn't get the six-figure job at 22, which means I won't be able to buy my house at 25, which means I won't be able to get married at 30, which means I won't be able to move to Texas at 32. You've mapped out your whole life, and you've mapped it out without God. I heard this saying before, and I think it's so powerful, where it says, don't plan your life so much that you plan God out of it. You don't even give any wiggle room for God to even work in your life. And back to my point of God does not need a lot of times. I think in doing things our way, sometimes we can actually prolong the blessing because we think it has to go a certain way. God can take you through a quick little shortcut and you get there very quickly, but you're trying to do it on your timeline of like, it has to follow this exact same timeline for it to work out, when God is like, girl, if you just surrender and you take a quick little step back, I can get you there in about 6 months to a year. But you're like, no, it has to work exactly this way. You don't even give God room to like shuffle things around. I was like, you know what? Instead of you going through here, I'll take you through there. I'll put this person in your path so they can help you so you can get there a little bit quicker. And this is one that I really, really had to like get up in there, because one thing about me, once I have an idea in my head, it has to come to life. I have to do it right then and there. I went to the bank like 2 weeks ago and I was trying to open a new account. They were like, you need these documents to open the bank account and whatnot. Because I had that idea in my head of I have to open that bank account today, they were like, yeah, it takes about 90 minutes to open the bank. It was already at like 4:30 at that point. And I didn't even know what documents they were talking about. I have to go look on Google to go find out the documents and all this stuff. But I was like, no, absolutely not. I have to get these documents in today. I have to do it today. No. And I sat down for a second. I was like, Kemi, if you don't open this bank account today, will the world end? Will life not move on? And I understand the passion behind it sometimes, because you're just so passionate about something of like, okay, I really need to do this and I want to do it now. However, I was just trying to rush the process. And after going home and looking up what the documents were and knowing that I didn't have these documents and I probably won't have them for the next few days, I was like, Kemi, just relax. And although it didn't happen on that day, it happened, I think probably close to a week later actually, before I was actually able to open the bank account. But I was able to get paired with somebody who specialized in the bank account that I was able to open up. And that was just such a powerful moment for me, because I'm like, Kemi, you were trying to rush it to get it done that day, when the person you were trying to rush to get it done does not even specialize in that area. But me just taking a step back and being like, Kemi, breathe. I understand that you're passionate about the idea. I understand you want to open this bank account. But if you don't open it today, the world will not end. I took a step back and I got paired with somebody who, if I go to her with any question, she can answer them, because that's her specialty, rather than me rushing to get it done with somebody else. Like, they were going to help me, they were going to get it done, but it wasn't their specialty. And I think that was just such like a eye-opening moment of like, Kemi, trying to rush it your way, trying to rush it to be your timeline, trying to do things according to your plan and your way and not God's, sometimes you're making your life more difficult. Had you just sat back, surrendered, and let God plan out your life for you, it will be a lot easier than you trying to force your life to fit into this box, when it's like, God is like, I have so much bigger, but you're like, no, it has to be exactly this way. And it's really something that I've had to tell myself of like, Kemi, if it's not working out, breathe. Like, when I tell y'all I was frantic that day, I was like, no, I have to get these documents. I want to open this bank account today. It has to work out today because I've set my mind out that it has to work out today. Why did it have to work out that day? Like, don't make your life harder than it needs to be because you want your life to fit your timeline and not God's timeline. And another part of this, I saw a video that talked about this, and I watched and I was like, oh, guilty, guilty, guilty. A lot of us like to play God in our life, lowercase g. The moment something is not working out the way we want it to, the moment our life is not following a certain timeline, you swoop in and you play Superman. You play Batman or whatever other superhero there is out there. You swoop in and you play this little God in your life. You're trying to do your best to control your life. Playing God in your life will get you nowhere. And this is one that I've had to like keep telling myself, because when certain things are not going a certain way that I wanted to, that are not going to the certain timeline that I wanted to, and I'm like, God's not doing it. Let me swoop in and save the day. And God took me through an instance where he took me down to the bare of, girl, you gonna sit here and trust me. And I was like, but God, I want to save it. It's like, sit down. And I had to sit down and trust God. But I was so close to just being like, oh God, this is not happening the way I wanted to. Let me save the day. And there was no need to do that because I still got the help that I needed. It was just in God's timing and not my timing. And God forcing me to kind of just sit in that, like, I'm not going to save the day right now. There's no backup option. Simply trust me in this moment where I had to let go of the timing and playing God in my life of like, oh, if it's not going to a certain way, let me just save it. Let me just help. I don't need to play God in my life when I have God. Simply let God work in his own timing in your life. Yes, it looks scary. Yes, it's so scary. It's to the very last minute. However, we still serve a great God. We still serve a good God. He will do what he needs to do with your life without you stepping in and playing Superman when you should go sit your butt down and surrender to him. And I was so close to just being like, God, I can't take it. This moment is so uncomfortable. Sometimes we need to sit in that uncomfortable feeling of like, the timeline is not looking right, but I'm going to sit still. The timeline that I mapped out is not panning out, but I'm going to sit still and trust God's timing. A lot of us, we need to get comfortable with sitting in that uncomfortable feeling. Sit still and just stop playing God in your life. Stop taking control. Stop swooping in when things aren't panning out to the timeline that you had in your mind. Stop swooping in. Let God be God. I'm saying this to y'all more than anything. I'm saying it to myself because I'm so used to it's not working out the way I want to. Let me swoop in and save the day. And I just have to say to somebody, like, let God be God. In this video, I could really go on and on about trusting God's timing, but one of the last things that I wrote was, sometimes we're too close to see what he's even doing. Again, back to the 2050 vision and the 2020 vision. We're not seeing the full picture, so trust God's timing. And one of the last things that I wrote was, don't be so quick to jump at opportunities that fit your timeline, but they don't fit God's timeline. They say not everything that glitters is gold. While certain things might look like the right thing, they're not necessarily God's thing. So while an opportunity might come, maybe a job that you're like, oh, this will help me get to here quicker, God can get you another job that will fit his timeline a lot better. Ultimately, we really need to trust that God is the author and finisher of our faith, and he knows what's best for us, and his timeline is always going to be better than our timeline for our life. Anyway, that's it for me. I shall see you in the next one, and bye. Oh, I only went God's way.